Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. We're talking today about abandonment, which is one of the core schemas that produce psychological suffering. Early impressions leave impressions on our mind, and we operate through these representations on a daily basis. If you have been exposed to abandonment in your lifetime, a schema has to develop. What does it mean to be exposed to abandonment? Well, the loss of a parent leaves us with a residual impression about the nature of your reality. Children personalize their experience, and when a parent is not present, there is a tendency for the child to organize that event in terms of themselves. That means that they believe that they are that experience, and of course they are disappointed. An essential need is being frustrated, and they tend to identify as the emotional wound. In other words, my father is not around because of something that I have done or something that I am. So that is personalizing, and that is why the representation becomes fixated. It enters the idea of identity. So we identify with experiences, and the child says to herself or himself, I am the deserted child. Sometimes children will lose a parent, and they'll have an attending other parent who will provide a great deal of attending, and they feel at some point in their lives that they're lucky to have all the attention of a particular parent rather than having to compete for their attention. This does not really save the child from the emotional wound. So the loss of a parent is where we develop our abandonment schema. It is a primary relationship emotional wound. Now, you may not identify with it because and have an abandonment schema, because there is also the ambiguous loss when a parent is not behaving like a parent. The child still loses the parent. For example, when a parent or parents are alcoholic, that frustration that the child has with the parent's behavior again results in the loss of the archetype, if you will, of the parent, and the child is indeed deserted even while the parent is there. So in those cases, again, the child attempts to change the parent, and a secondary schema develops when the child is unable to do so. In other words, children want to be cherished, and they want to be attended, they want to be understood, they want to be protected, they want to be nurtured, and they are by nature adorable. You'll notice children with the big eyes, they're very adorable, and nature has made them adorable so that the parent falls in love with them. And a child has a sense of that. And when a child is unable to work his or her charm on the parent, secondary to alcoholism, or perhaps it can be psychological problems, psychiatric problems also, or when a parent is just so fully ill-equipped to do the job, where ignorance and or youth is the problem. In other words, the parent is not ripe yet to take care of the child, or has come out of a situation where she or he has not learned to be loving and caring and respectful towards the child. This is the equivalent to loss for that child, and it is part of the primary emotional wound. In other words, it is a primary relationship. That means in the family, emotional wound. So you get an emotional wound at that level. It will influence how you are able to reestablish intimate relationships. So you may be very effective socially, so to speak, but are unable to navigate loving relationships. With people that suffer abandonment schema, in other words, they're exposed to a frustration of this essential need. There's at times a lot of bickering between the parent and the siblings, between the person and his or her siblings also, and the parents also. So relationships at the primary level are wounded. And themes like loyalty become very important. You said this, you don't say that, you're not being loyal to me, you are deserting me. So these themes develop. So in mindfulness-based anxiety reduction, we learn the skill of placing our attention in meditative placement. Meditative placement allows us to see mental events rather than be the mental events. So what that does is it allows us to fall back somewhat and observe our mind as it delivers these very difficult stories, as it delivers these feelings into our awareness. The blessing of mindfulness is that we gain psychological distance from those mental events, and we are then not fully identified with them. This opens options up for us. And mindfulness-based anxiety reduction is based in non-conceptual awareness. Non-conceptual awareness is decentered awareness. In other words, it doesn't personalize the event. So in other words, we see ourselves impersonally. And what would that look like? Well, I can point here. We have a tendency to point this way when we think of ourselves. Well, we wake up to the fact that we are in all directions. In other words, what we are is not a concept. It is the unfolding moment. It is nature itself. In other words, we are looking at nature. It is actually nature that is looking. This thing that we're looking at is all embracing, incorporating us. And we are it. In other words, what we do in non-conceptual awareness, what we do in mindfulness meditation as taught in MBAR, is we stop the personalizing process. There's no story of you. You're no longer the protagonist of the tale of your life. We are simply life happening. That opens up a lot of possibilities for us. We see life much more scientifically and more objectively, and that also forms equivalent representations in our mind, and it changes the entire conception of our world. It changes our worldview, and it changes our self-conception. There will be shifts in our values by a recurrent exposure to mindfulness-based anxiety reductions on non-conceptual awareness approach. So in other words, when you modulate out of the conceptual field, in other words, the field of duality, the field that you think of yourself, you're thinking of yourself as a historical person with a history. Well, we let that story go, and we attend the current moment, and it is not we that is attending, but life itself, and we hold that awareness as the meditative placement of our attention. It allows us to see mental events. It allows us to see the abandonment schema as it is triggered. We have thoughts that are equivalent to abandonment. In other words, we will see ourselves withdrawing perhaps to protect ourselves. That means that we'll tend towards perhaps a radical independence, so that we do not have to tolerate the painful event of being deserted. Or we may become very needy, for example. We can become a person that tends to plea for love regularly, and then experiences humiliation and pain from that. We can also become negotiators, where we try to barter a relationship, and that tends towards that codependency. So it's a very serious emotional wound, abandonment. It is apprehended by mindfulness. Mindfulness is able to apprehend this mental event. In the apprehending of that event, you distance yourself from it, and that cannot be done without really letting go of this personalizing perspective. Otherwise, you'll be seeing yourself building the story again, and the abandonment schema is insidious. So you can see that if it gets triggered, you start to think, well, I'll withdraw from relationships, and you may confuse that with spiritual awareness. So it's a very tricky, it's a tricky job to recover from this very serious emotional wound. If indeed your parent was exposed, or if your parents were exposed to desertion, they too may have the abandonment schema, and there's a kind of a splitting that can occur in their behaviors. You know, you have the rageaholic mom or the rageaholic dad, where one moment it's caring, the other moment it's not. So this type of splitting does occur. You can imagine the emotional wound that comes from the heartbreak when a parent is unloving, uncherishing, not there for you. It can drive you crazy, and indeed it results in emotional wounds. So the recovery from abandonment is to understand its presence, and of course it's sometimes very difficult to see. We forget that we are wounded, and we attribute our behavior to our choices rather than to the lawful unfolding of the abandonment schema. In other words, we find ourselves being separated from those we would like to care for. We find ourselves betrayed. We find ourselves protecting ourselves, and we attribute that behavior to our free choice. It is not the case. It is in fact the abandonment schema unfolding as personal reality. In other words, the belief is becoming real, and that the interruption of that is to identify the belief, and to isolate it. Well, this was a lesson on abandonment schema, and again, we looked at it from the terms of being exposed to events like the loss of a parent, and that could be the innocent loss. The death of a parent will still be personalized by the child, or it can be the behavior of the parent that produces an ambiguous sense of desertion. And just as a point of review, we begin to practice mindfulness-based anxiety reduction's approach to mindfulness, which is to enter non-conceptual awareness intermittently. And with that, we begin to become sensitive to our thoughts, our feelings, and even our circumstances. The circumstances are repetitions. They reveal the emotional wound. So we will go further with other types of emotional wounds, and there is abuse, deprivation, subjugation, High levels of impulsivity are also considered in mindfulness-based anxiety reduction. We'll try to take a look at all of